I mean, look at the papers, look at the internet. This is no longer a big thing, but Bruce has been saying it now for a while. But the second piece, which is in the book that he was talking about, that he was going to talk about a little bit tonight, and that for many of you he just signed, is about what's next. What are the new ways that cities can take control and finance the future? So there's a couple of observations that I want to make sure that we talk about tonight before he gets up here that I think are really important. Number one is his observation that cities are really about a different form of governance, and particularly the networks. So mayors aren't in charge. This is a terrible part of his book, but mayors aren't in charge. Corporate leaders aren't in charge. In fact, what you see across cities is that from universities to hospitals to private enterprise to government, you think about the ways that these networks work together to make things happen, and that's really what drives the city's future. The second piece is that innovation is a big piece of what has to happen for cities to thrive economically. One of the insights of Metropolitan Revolution 5 years ago was that we needed to be thinking about innovation in this district form. Now look where we sit today. Part of why we are at the Edney Innovation Center, and we have this innovation district concentrated on densifying people and making sure that everyone is involved, is because of the ideas of Bruce Katz. That's been fundamentally a big change in our city. The third piece, which is so important in this book, is that cities are really the places of equity. We live in a time of income inequality. And if we're going to make changes and make sure that more people have access to the power and to the financing that can change their lives, it's going to happen in cities. So the new localism helps us to think not only about these issues, but also about the ways that different places across the world are financing this, so that when we have great ideas, when we decide what we want to do, there's actually a mechanism to make it happen. I think I hope you get a chance to ask a few questions and talk to Bruce tonight. He is practical. He's worked in federal government. He's worked across the globe with lots of different entities. He's thoughtful, and most of all, he's really a great friend to Chattanooga. Please welcome Bruce Katz.
You might be able to hear me from First of all, it's incredible to be back. Part of the reason I love coming to Chattanooga. And I like literally live on that stuff. Not that I particularly need it, but one of the first stops we made was what was it, Plus Coffee by the Tomorrow Building? Oh my God. So your future is already set. But I want to just thank the mayor, Ken Hayes, some of the former mayors who are here. This is a very special place, and you're at a very special moment. So yes, responsibility is devolving down from higher levels of government, and there are places in this country and around the world that will seize the moment to become even greater places. This is one of them. So, and I hope as we go through this presentation and the conversation, you believe that, and more importantly, you seize the future. So, this is obvious, right? Everything has changed. Economy, society, technology, politics. We tend to focus on this, right? We tend to focus on the rise of angry populism and the rise of leaders who exploit very real grievances in this country and elsewhere. Economic insecurity, cultural anxiety. But there are structural changes in the world today. Globalization, to a large extent, has diminished the role of the nation state and elevated the role of the city state. And that's just a fact of life. What the economy wants today is the concentration and agglomeration and co-location of economic assets in relatively small geographies. And guess what? You have it here, right? Downtown, cycle over to UTC. You've got your public utility, which made one of the smartest investments in the world in the high-speed internet and the smart grid, right? Everything is located in a relatively small geography, and that's what the economy wants today, and that's what people want today, even though we're more wired and caffeinated to the max. Why do cities matter? They matter because they are the hubs of innovation and productivity. It is this concentration effect, what we call the magic square mile or the magic 3 square miles in a vast landscape. The US is 3.8 million square miles, but our economy tends to be on a foundation of 500 square miles or 1,000 square miles, the cores of our cities and counties. When you set off growth, you have economic opportunity if you provide the schools and the skills so people can get on the ladder. And I heard about baby university today because you got to start really early. I'm going to steal that phrase. I will attribute it to you, but we need baby universities. Cities are very diverse. That's the strength of this country. That is our strength, right? Everyone else in the world, China, most of Europe, they're hitting a demographic wall. We keep replenishing ourselves, or we did, right? We keep replenishing ourselves. And that gives us the strength to basically innovate for a broad part of humanity. And finally, sustainable development. You know, cities are essentially going to solve the climate issue, because the climate issue at the end of the day is about energy and buildings and transport. Well, guess what cities concentrate? So this book is about power. That's really what this book is about. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I worked for the Brooklyn Democratic Machine. I was told and taught about power from an early age. This is about the devolution of power, down from the nation state to the city state, from the public sector to the horizontal network, as the mayor was describing, public, private, civic, university, labor, environment, community. Cities are not governments, right? The national government is just a government. States are just governments, which means they can be hijacked by partisanship. Cities are networks, which means they are intensely pragmatic. You get rewarded for getting stuff done, not for obstructing progress. Cities are also interdisciplinary. You know, at the federal level, I was the chief of staff of the Housing and Urban Development Department. Whatever the issue was, my answer was housing, right? If I had walked across the block, I would have been in the Department of Transportation. If someone had said, we have a congestion problem, I would go, widen the road, right? Cities think about issues from 360 degrees. Maybe the solution to traffic congestion is technology, or moving where people live, or moving where people work. It's the interdisciplinary, holistic, integrated approach. So power is devolving down in this world to the city-state. And the city-state is the right level for this because it's a network and it tends to think about issues with the multidimensionality that issues have. So we think new localism is a philosophy and a practice of problem solving for the 21st century, right? Power belongs to the problem solvers. It doesn't belong to folks who sit and stop progress. They may win occasionally, and they may stop and impede and hinder progress. But at the end of the day, true power belongs to the problem solvers. And at the, you know, whether the issue is economic opportunity or demographic transformation, the aging of our society, whether it's climate change, whether it's competitiveness, cities are where it's at, not just here, but around the world, right? And the nation state's only a couple hundred years old. Think about it, right? The nation state is only a couple hundred years old. Cities have existed for millennia. So if you're in a bottom-up world, and you're in a horizontal world, and you're in a city world, what really matters are norms and models that can be started someplace, captured, codified, and then adapted and adopted by other cities around the world. So you want to be searching for the norms of growth and of governance and finance. So that's what this book really is about. And I wrote it with a very good friend of mine who's a total brainiac. And about a week after the 2016 election, I was about the 5th phase of mourning, which is not a partisan statement. It's just a statement of who was elected president. And I called him up and I said, we should write a book together. And I just wanted, I said, have you ever written a book? And he says, no, I haven't. I said, it's like a masochistic act. You'll sit in your basement, you'll look at your dog will look at you, and you'll wonder, why am I doing this? But we both took it on to try to provide what we hope is a roadmap for cities in the United States and elsewhere. So let me tell you 3 stories, and then I'll bring it back to Chattanooga. Growth, Pittsburgh, okay? Late 1970s, the economy of Pittsburgh collapsed, literally overnight. Tens of thousands of jobs basically left the city. What we say is that the beginning of the revival happened in the rubble of the 3 Mile Island disaster. Does anyone remember 3 Mile Island? The China syndrome, right? So what we had was a nuclear disaster in the late 70s, around the same time that the steel industry collapsed. A whole bunch of major global companies were throwing tens of millions of dollars trying to figure out how to clean up the mess. And then they found this guy sitting on top, Red Whittaker, who was a roboticist before anyone knew what robotics was. And he surrounded himself with all these folks. And at that time, what robots were was if you went to the Ford Motor Company factory in Dearborn or wherever, the robots would just sit there and spray cars with paint as they went along. These guys invented mobile robots, right? They basically were at the beginning of autonomous vehicles. And essentially, they figured out how to clean up 3 Mile Island and assess the damage. They did it because they were part of this magic mile. Carnegie Mellon, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, an early 20th century geography of really talented workers, faculty, students, that provided a platform for innovative growth, innovative products, process innovation. This is an early 20th century geography. For a long time, the United States walked away from this geography. We started building research labs far away from the central core because we wanted to keep our secret secret. But, essentially innovation doesn't happen from some brainiac sitting in a garage. Our sense is almost like celebrity innovators like Steve Jobs, like sitting in their garage, oh, I have a magic moment. No, it happens from an ecosystem of universities, companies, startups, scale-ups, accelerators, incubators, investors, all within a relatively small geography. So here are 5 next-generation technologies. They're part of like 15 or 20 in the world today. And they're moving from the lab to prototyping to ubiquitous adoption. And within a relatively short period of time, these next-generation technologies will blow through the world, and they'll be half of global GDP. What Pittsburgh understood 40 years ago, without really being able to name it, was they had to basically harness the future. They had to create centers of excellence about stuff that no one had even had a name for. Robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data analytics, autonomous vehicles. And they invested at scale in a sustained way, private and civic capital, and a lot of federal money when the federal government actually had a brain. And they basically were able to harness the future. So Pittsburgh's like the it city, And my father's sister actually lived in Steubenville, which is part of the old steel supply chain. So when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, my summer was basically going to LaGuardia Airport, being put on a plane to be sent to Pittsburgh. At the time, you couldn't breathe because it was an industrial center. And that was my summer. Most people summer somewhere else, but I went to Pittsburgh. I didn't think it is the it city. It is the it city today. But more importantly, if you're a global company and you're Google, you're Disney, you're Amazon, you're Uber, you have to be in Pittsburgh, right? You have to be near talent. You have to be near knowledge. You have to be near expertise, right? That's what matters. And you're building it here in some really interesting and distinctive ways. So a city must think like a system. You have to think across all these different kind of inputs to growth. You have to act like an entrepreneur. You have to take risk. When people say, well, that's not going to pan out, you actually have to basically believe in yourselves. Pittsburgh decided to move from being a rust belt to a brain belt before anyone really thought that was the way you were supposed to go, and they've succeeded. They built on who they were. Used to be a maker city. They just make different things today. And a large-scale philanthropic investment that took risk. Something to think about. Okay, Indianapolis. Indianapolis in the middle of the 1970s was like most places. It was completely desolate in its downtown, right? A bunch of folks would go down there with shotguns and shoot at pigeons. That was a good day, right? Kurt Vonnegut was from Indianapolis. He basically said, this is a city where 364 days you played miniature golf, and on the 365th day you went to the Speedway. This was a really boring place, right? So they decided to restore the core, and they did it by becoming the amateur sports capital of the world. So if you were into the Olympics and you were trying to basically, whatever it was, running or what, irrespective of the sport, you would go to Indianapolis, and that's where you have the amateur trials. They built a whole bunch of stadia and facilities in the downtown. They stole the Baltimore Colts in the middle of the night. If you're from Indianapolis, that is like the height of, human civilization. If you're from Baltimore, you hate these people. But in any event, at some point, they decided, and they also built, by the way, this civic, private, public Indiana sports corporations. They are able to do all these things. At some point, they decided, how much beer and hot dogs can you actually consume at a basketball game? We've got to get from basketball to biotech. We've got to get the high road of economic development. So they built this thing that no one has ever heard of, by the way, Central Indiana Corporate Partnership. It's a network of 60 corporate, philanthropic, and university CEOs who work very closely with the public elected officials, and they steer and steward the economy by investing in sectors, bio, life sciences, trade and logistics, stuff that Indiana and Indianapolis is actually good at. They're not delusional, these folks. They're not saying, let's be the Silicon Valley of the heartland. That ain't gonna happen. But what you can be is the best 21st century version of yourself. Indiana is now the second largest exporter of life science products in this country after California. If you invest smartly and strategically at scale for a sustained period of time, you win. So a lot of private money, a lot of philanthropic money, very well spent, very well managed. And essentially, they've become an ecosystem rather than an ecosystem, right? They are very smart people in Indianapolis, but when they're all together, they behave, right? This is the rules of the sandbox. They play well together. They don't throw sand in each other's face. They've perfected what we call the mechanics of collaboration. When they get together, they meet to decide, not to discuss. They actually make decisions together about the future of their economy. They act at the district level, the city level, the metropolitan level, the regional level. They're very smart at which levels they operate at, and they organize private and civic wealth and harness it and focus it, channel it to things that are going to have transformative effect for everyone. Indianapolis is the city of tomorrow because they act through collaboration. Finance, last story. How many people have been to Copenhagen? Okay, so Copenhagen, the biggest threat to your life is walking out of your hotel and getting hit by a cyclist, right? I mean, everyone, the Danes love to cycle. Nearly 50%, 50, bike to work or school. This is a crazy place, right? Not America. But if you go back to the mid-1980s, 18% unemployment, the city was fiscally bankrupt, right? Because the population of jobs had moved out of the core of the city, and the whole reason of the port, the raison d'etre, had moved to southern Sweden. So this was a place that was in deep crisis, right? And they decided, national leaders, local leaders, we got to do something really big. So let's build a modern, state-of-the-art subway system in Copenhagen. And everyone, you know, a lot of kroners, a lot of Danish kroners, right? They said, okay, let's do this without taxing our citizenry. All the money's gone, as the Beatles said, time to start thinking. They built a company called the Copenhagen City and Port Development Corporation. It was like a merger of multiple entities. It was a publicly owned, professionally managed company. And then they took all this land in the North Harbor and then the Oristad district, which is the district between the downtown and the airport. They took all the land and the buildings that the public owned and put it under the aegis and management of this publicly owned, professionally managed corporation. And they basically said, we're going to let you manage all this stuff, but the revenue from this, from land sales, land leases, must go to fund the subway system, right? So everyone knew that at the end of the day, there was a pot at the end of the rainbow, right? And what they've done is build this incredible subway system without a kroner, without a dollar. They've done it all from land sales and land leases, right? This is public wealth. And in the United States, there's enormous public wealth. But we don't manage it this well. We either privatize it because we have a hole in our budget. Oh my God, we better sell that building, right? So we can balance the budget. Or we manage it like the New York Port Authority through patronage and mediocrity. This is a different model. Publicly owned, professionally managed. The Danes do it, the Germans do it, the Finns do it, the Singaporeans do it, the Hong Kongians do it, if that's a word. We have to start doing this, right? All the money's gone, nowhere to go. So what they say, the guy who was the former mayor, who's now the head of the Copenhagen City and Port Development Corporation, we're not here for the quick fix. We're not here to balance this year's budget. We're here for the long haul. We're here to build what is now the third wealthiest city in the world. We've got to start acting like this. And to start, you know, every American city knows what it owes. What are our pension liabilities? What are our health liabilities? Our cities don't know what they own. And they don't know the value of what we own. And that's where the secret is. We've got to basically repurpose our institutions to fund the future. And we have to come up with this public-private model. The public should own this, but the private sector should manage it for a purpose, for a public good, for a public purpose. We're going to have to get through beyond this public-private fight we have in this country, which doesn't allow us to make these achievements. So, can we build a nation of problem solvers? I think this city, this county, this metropolis is at the vanguard of new localism. Whatever you all drink in the water here, it enables a level of collaboration and civic cooperation that goes back decades. There's a lot of people in the room I recognize here who are responsible what happened on the waterfront, that are responsible what happened in this downtown. You were restoring the core, and you were creating a quality place before we even knew what the returns would be. But you knew you needed a center of your community. So here's our minor challenge. For every Pittsburgh, there's dozens of places that can't wait till they subsidize the next stadia or do something which is about consumption rather than innovation. For every Indianapolis, we've got lots of places that do collaborate, but they don't do it in any formal way, and they don't organize private and civic wealth and put it towards common purpose. And for every Copenhagen, there are thousands of places that don't even understand what public wealth is, right? They don't know what they own, and ownership really, really, really matters. So, you know, bottom line, if you're going to be a place that just doesn't survive because there's a big storm in this country right now, The federal government, like Elvis, has left the building. They're not coming back anytime soon. And, you know, what is the federal government? It's mostly a health insurance company with an army. So it doesn't, you know, if we're waiting for them to invest in our children, if we're waiting for them to invest in a customized way in our infrastructure, if we're waiting for them to commercialize research and grow entrepreneurs, we will be waiting for hundreds of years. So this mythology that there's a group of smart people in Washington, D.C., or sometimes in state capitals, who are smart enough to sort of show the direction of a country as complex and multidimensional and diverse as ours, is absurd. This is the level that has the expertise and the experience and knowledge, not to do all things. We're not going to create a safety net at this level, or, you know, protect the homeland, or, you know, write rules that will cover the whole country. But this is the level at which we can fund and imagine and envision the future. So what's your edge? You know, what is special about this place, right, that you can build? It's a medium-sized city, but it's a city between Atlanta and Nashville, which means you're very well located. And you're in a part of the country that, for the most part, has wrecked itself with sprawl and decentralization, and you have a very quality, livable place where in a very small geography, you can literally walk or cycle between all your anchor institutions, including your public utility and your university and major employers and the waterfront. I mean, this is an incredibly tight geography here that the market is now revaluing, and you're still early days. I think you're 15 to 20% of what this core could be. Who's in charge? Well, a lot of people are in charge. That's what makes America so great, you know? That's the true genius of American, not just federalism, but American governance, is we're not, you know, waiting for Godot. There's no deus ex machina, right? I mean, the solutions can come from leaders from disparate walks of life, which means they can crowdsource different kinds of experience and expertise. And where is your power? We mostly have 20th century institutions in a 21st century world. You know, we created our community foundations 100 years ago. We created our schools districts 100 years ago. We created public authorities 75 years ago. It's time for a reboot. It's time to do what Indianapolis and St. Louis and Cincinnati have done. Create private-public, public-private, private-civic, a whole new kind of institutional mass in this country that can organize private and civic wealth, that can help unlock public wealth, that can really make the kind of investments in our future and our children that matter. So, you know, at the end of the day, you know, when you write a book, you don't know whether by the end you're going to be completely depressed or completely optimistic. We ended this book unbelievably optimistic. And we ended up also somewhat realistic, feeling like this is a time where we've got to build a new class of city and metropolitan leaders and a new kind of institutions, whether they're new institutions or repurposed institutions. That's for every place to decide. But this is the moment of the city-state, right? And so this is our moment. The cavalry's not coming, right? It's up to us to rebuild our communities, and up to us to rebuild this country, and ultimately up to us to rebuild the world. So that's the new localism. Sticking by it. Look forward to the conversation. Oh, you want? Oh, sorry. Oh, move it over here. Okay. That wasn't very elegant, but, you know, it got the job done. Yeah, right. Oh, thanks.
Bruce. Hello? Outstanding. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for taking the time to come down here and share a little bit about new localism with us. Samir Burke, thank you for creating this unique opportunity for Chattanooga to think about the future of localism and how it applies. So I'll start off. Power reimagined, localism. What does that really mean for broadly, but really for a city like Chattanooga, for the individual? What should they take away from new localism and what power looks like reimagined?
So when I was a kid, this will just show you how old I am, there was a show called Schoolhouse Rock. Does anyone remember that? And it was, and they, this is the way we were educated. And there was one sort of segment where it was, I'm a Bill on Capitol Hill, and it was all about power, and it was all about hierarchy, and, the national government is the power, and then, oh yeah, there's also the states, and they rain down, occasionally they dribble out certain kinds of power to these little people, the cities and the counties, and so we all were basically brought up believing you had to look up for power. And so this book at the beginning basically says, well, you know what? In the 21st century, governmental power is not the only power. There's market power and there's civic power. And markets are revaluing cities and the cores of cities and the cores of counties because it wants agglomeration and concentration. And civic power is like people from different walks of life and different constituencies and representing the diversity of their communities. And so cities have different kinds of power than just what the national government or states permit them to do. And to a large extent, this book is about cities recognizing these other kinds of powers and then leveraging it to the max. And so and look, this is an observation first and foremost, and obviously we only had the stories that we had seen. So since we've been on the book tour, I feel like, there's like a new localism too, because I keep seeing all this other stuff going on. And like Godfather Part 2, it'll be better than the first one, May not sell as much. But so power is not just about government. It's really about government, market, and civic, and the places that can figure out the synergy between those three kinds of power are going to do very well.
So Mayor Burke, to that point, I think Bruce has touched on the fact that a lot of the national conversation is devolved, and leaders like yourself are responsible for driving the next level of progress for all the folks in this room. Can you talk a little bit about how you see the national perspective and what that means in terms of how you're governing Chattanooga?
Well, I think, first of all, let me say that it's important. I think Bruce has as a little asterisk, here are the problems the cities can't solve.
Right.
In my life, that asterisk is pretty big. Like, we have systematically defunded mental health in our country. That's a pretty big problem for us at the local level. Inequality and income inequality doesn't just come from local economies. It comes from tax policy and the Fed's policy, and all. There's all kinds of things that we have a lot of problems solving. Then on top of that, and I think this is a little bit less of a problem, but the problem nevertheless is that particularly state government in Tennessee, but also state governments around the country are particularly hostile to city power. And you see more preemption of what cities can do on the state level. So I think I see the asterisk maybe a little bit bigger because he's looking at the asterisk in terms of a couple of decades, and I'm looking at it in terms of 3 years that I have left to be mayor of the city. So take that into account. But I do think, right, that what we have to do is think about this ability that we have to seize the moment and seize what we can do and make it happen. So I was at the U.S. Conference of Mayors last week, and I had dinner with the mayor of Denver, which is a city that is incredible. It's about the same size as Baltimore. The day that I had dinner with the mayor of Denver, I read a story in the New York Times that said Baltimore had 300 plus murders a year every year, and the mayor of Denver said, I think last year they had 57, right? There are real differences between the cities that use their power smartly and those that don't. And so even though we have, I think, these larger issues that we certainly wish the federal government would play into, there are moments that we have to understand, no, we've got to do what we can to change the course of our city, and there's immense ability to do that.
So I think one thing that comes up when you talk about your time as mayor, and I think Bruce, a lot of the investment language that you use in thinking about localism bears a question about time horizon and how we should be thinking about the application of localism in terms of our time horizon.
Sure. So, I have two responses to that, I suppose. First of all, it is really important for us to invest in our children and to invest at the earliest stage of their lives, and particularly to invest at the early stage of the lives of disadvantaged children, because they don't have, they don't believe in patient equity. You know, I mean, like, they're a kid. I mean, you know, they need investments now.
Right.
And I think the bottom line, you know, from the research community is we know what works. We actually know that certain kinds of investments from 0 to 3 have this kind of payoff and will reduce the achievement gap by X%. And then if you build on that and invest from 3 to 6, you get an even bigger effect, and then K through 12, and yada, yada, yada. So for some things, we have to invest now. There's an urgency. And bottom line is investment in children don't really cost that much. I mean, when we talk about, oh my God, we have several $1 trillion of retrofit investment for our infrastructure, kids are pretty cheap compared to that, you know? And so we really, as communities, need to just get with it and start investing in our children, like now. And then for a lot of other stuff, that's where patient equity comes in. Right. That's where the Copenhagen model comes in. That's where you have to basically invest, even if you want market returns. You want to understand that the cycle of return may not be what happens on Wall Street, which is every quarter. Right. It might take 3 or 5 or 7 or 10 years. But if you invest smartly and strategically, the payoff will even be greater. And so that, from my perspective, is not just about the investor side being patient. It's about the structure and mechanisms, right? I mean, Copenhagen City and Port, Indianapolis, Central Indiana Corporate Partnership. These are institutions, they're structures, they're mechanisms for getting the big payoff over time. I think we have to be institutionalists to some extent when we think about building for the long term.
I'm going to answer that a little bit differently because I only think in 4-year terms. I don't think anything beyond 4 years. So earlier tonight, I see Mayor Littlefield here tonight, and Mayor Kinsey was here earlier this evening. I'm not sure if he's still here. But I think about the legacy of what's happening in Chattanooga, and thinking about Bruce's book and networks, and saying that that's really what you need to continue to build on success, because if at any point we turn back, you can do a lot of damage. And so I know Chattanooga 2.0 is been something that our community has been focused on. One of the reasons why I think that those kind of initiatives really are helpful is because no matter who's at the top of an institution, right, then that table keeps getting set and people keep showing up to the table. And so I won't be mayor anymore in 3 years. Someone else will be there. They'll show up at the table. The network that we build around Chattanooga is incredibly powerful because it doesn't think in terms of who's in charge and how long are they going to be in charge, but they can actually build that long-term city that we want, so that even if somebody comes by and they say, I don't want to sit at the table, that's okay, the table keeps going.
I think the public-private partnerships that have been established in this city highlight a lot of the long-term value that will extend even past an administration and will continue kind of the good work that's going on. I want to switch gears. So the subtitle of the book is how cities can thrive in an age of populism. Populist kind of theory can be a loaded word nowadays. We live in interesting times. What does that mean today, and how is that different than populist eras that we've seen in this country in previous regimes?
Yeah, I think today populism, whether it's populism on the left, which, I think Bernie Sanders represented, frankly, or populism on the right. I'm not sure what Donald Trump actually represents, but, depending on the tweet of the day, maybe we can pinpoint it. But I think what populism really reflects is there is anger, and there's justifiable anger in this country, and frankly, in many of the mature economies around the world, that the economy is not working for people. It's not working for people who actually are working very hard. They're playing by the rules, and they can't seem to make any progress. They're not getting the quality wages and the quality benefits they need to support their family. So there are serious issues that have emerged. And, look, think back to 1980. China was not, quote unquote, online. India was not online. Billions of people were living in some kind of alternative universe economically. They're now online. And that's had an enormous effect on competitiveness, and it's an enormous effect on wages. And we haven't had the kind of response from our leadership, frankly, at the national level and in many of our states to prepare our workforce for this brutally competitive world. So the populists are exploiting those grievances. They're exploiting those anger. They're acting as 21st century demagogues, essentially, right? And they're selling a story that is not true, whether it's on the left or the right. And so what has happened is new localism has emerged to fill the vacuum, essentially, and in my view, actually better reflect the distributed and networked reality of the world. I mean, I don't think this is just cyclical. I don't think the storm is going to pass somehow, and we're going to end up, we're back again, in some kind of bipartisan garden, No, I think we're in a very tough period of partisanship, and partisanship will hijack governments. But cities are networks, and therefore we've got to perfect a different kind of problem solving. Now, populism in the past was always angry. Right? It was always angry. But when we had agrarian populism in the late 19th century, it did lead to some very positive things. There's a public bank in North Dakota if you want to go look for an institution that was created out of populism. So maybe populism can be sort of channeled in some positive ways, but I'm not waiting for that either. I think we really have to perfect the power we have at this level so we can ride out the storm and then reverse engineer our national and state governments. They serve us. They serve us. They're at the, they're not at the higher level. They're at the lower level. Cities and counties are at the higher level, and we're waiting for these forms of democratic institutions to actually do their job, frankly.
Outstanding. Well, Mayor Burke, I came down here, moved to Chattanooga almost 2 years ago, and was interested in what coming to a city like Chattanooga would be like. I think when you think about populism and you think about the concepts around diversity and democracy that Bruce talked about as kind of cornerstones of localism, how is Chattanooga, an incredibly diverse city, managing to find success amid all of the larger populist rhetoric and local populist rhetoric that exists?
Yeah, so I think a different way to phrase what Bruce was talking about is that too many people in our city and too many people across the country feel like they have a ceiling. There's only so high they can rise. They can do whatever they want. They can go to school. They can train. But there's only so high they can rise. And at least the country that I grew up in, that's not the way it's supposed to work, right? The idea of America is that if you do all this work, you can be whoever you want. And many people just think that's not real anymore. That's not real. I think on top of that, we have a changing economy. And this is what I talk about all the time in this building, and that is that we live in a place that economic power can be more diverse than it ever has been before, because you don't need to be in New York City to invent the next big app, right? You don't need to be in San Francisco. You can be someplace else because the power that is over the web, you can be in India, right? And for us, what that means is that the more people that you get involved in your economy, the better off you are, because if we live in the innovation century, innovation runs on talent. And the more talent that you get involved in your economy, the better off you are. And so equity has to be at the core of everything that you do because it's the right thing, like we all agree. We should be able to stop there. But even beyond it being the right thing, it's the smart thing, because if we can tap into the talents of more of our people, we will be more prosperous. I guarantee that. The cities that tap into the talents of more of their citizens will be more prosperous. The end of the story.
Bruce, given the mayor's comments, how do we find ways to evangelize localism, to the masses? I think we have, a great room, a diverse room here, but how can people, obviously they can take the book, you get an autographed copy, share it with some friends, but, what's the method for the individual evangelizing this localism concept and spreading it throughout the community?
Yeah, so, for me, new localism is just the philosophy and practice of problem solving. And problem solving happens at the block level, at the neighborhood level, at the district level, at the city level, at the metropolitan level. I mean, it happens at all levels. So everyone can take responsibility for problem solving. And the great thing about problem solving, and this is actually the Denver story, and frankly, I think it's your story too in Chattanooga, is you solve one problem. In Denver, it was, the oil and gas economy collapsed in 1980, and everyone said, oh my God, we don't have a Carnegie Mellon, we don't have a Georgia Tech, we just have the mountains, but they're sort of far away. What are we going to do? And they began to invest, interestingly enough, in quality place. Lodo came out of the early 1980s, as well as other regional centers. You did the same thing along your waterfront and then into the downtown. You guys started investing, well, the economy may have collapsed, but we could still have a quality place. And now you're reaping the benefits of it. So that then led to the next thing. After they did these investments in regional centers, they built a world-class airport. Then they built 122 miles of light rail. They just kept problem solving in seriatim, And once you begin to collaborate in this way, it becomes infectious and it becomes a norm. It becomes a standard. If you're someone in the community who says, we don't want to do anything anymore, well, that's not the Denver way. I mean, go move, and I'm not going to say it here which place you should move to, but go move somewhere else. I mean, we are here to progress. And I think that's what you're doing here. You're creating a norm of leadership at all levels of this city and metropolis, where you're about problem solving, and then we just have to elevate the different kinds of problem solving that's going on. I mean, the block level and the neighborhood level are as important at times as the higher levels as well.
So when do you know that you're getting it right? Like if we think about a playbook, there's some things that you mentioned in the presentation, engaging hospital and health systems. We have the 7th largest public hospital in the country here in Erlanger. We have a fantastic university, large university in UTC, and great other small regional liberal arts universities in the surrounding area. So we're building talent. And this building here represents the innovation district and great companies that we're building here in Chattanooga. How do we know when we're getting it right when we think about the playbook?
I'll just talk at the human scale, because the one thing, there are places where you go within a half an hour you realize, are you in a problem-solving city or in a city that likes to obstruct? So you go to see the mayor. And the mayor, if the mayor, like your mayor, says, oh, if you're interested in that, you really need to go see this person. Or if you're interested in that, oh, there's this other person doing amazing stuff. You're in a certain kind of city, right? And then you go see that person, and that person, oh my God, there's this other thing going on the other side of town. I'll just drive you there and show you this thing. I mean, that's a certain kind of city. I go to other cities where I go to see the mayor, and they're just complaining. The city council, the state legislature, the business community. I mean, okay, well, you're obviously not problem solving. You're just complaining. And it's getting close to whining, So I think this is cultural. I mean, and it's also based on, it's what your parents taught you early. What kind of person do you want to be? I mean, really, it's not like that complicated. What kind of person do you want to be? Don't talk bad about other people. And in fact, maybe even go the opposite. Talk good about other people, because if they're doing good things, it's helping you either directly or indirectly. It's really like not that complicated. But we have to zone out the tweeter in chief, okay, because that's all negative. And it's like we're all being almost abused on a daily basis right now. We just have to zone out the negativity. Whether you're a Democrat, Republican, liberal, or conservative, it doesn't matter. Just zone it out. And let's just focus on getting stuff done.
So, Mayor Burke, I want to switch gears a little bit just to talk about the gig and what that's meant to the city. And I think it really epitomizes some of the localism that Bruce talks about, which is there's a national conversation. Obviously, we saw net neutrality reform that took place. But interestingly enough, we've kind of figured it out here in Chattanooga. EPB has figured it out. Where can we, in terms of your strategy, where can we really stand out and be an example for localism for other mayors that you speak with in other legislatures?
Well, I think, the gig is an example of where we have come together and seen great insight by leaders that said, we're going to take this leap of faith and make something happen and see, and then capitalize on it. We didn't necessarily know what it was going to lead to. We didn't know all the things, but we knew that it was a smart investment because it was going to open up opportunities for us. And then the last several years, we've just tried to capitalize on them. I still don't think we know all the different places that we can go with the gig. The Innovation District obviously has been a tremendous boon for us, and I think we're growing companies and we're seeing this ecosystem. I think it's still the tip of the iceberg, honestly. We get 16 million data hits a day through our smart grid system. We don't know how to monetize that and capitalize on it. So there's some company out there that we haven't interfaced with. There's some researcher out there who has yet to appear before us to say, you know what, I bet if you took all this information about energy, it would tell us this, and we could sell that and make money and start a company. There's somebody out there to do this, and we just haven't quite gotten to it yet. So there is a lot of stuff yet to be done with the gig. I think the main thing for us is we have to just continue to work together to capitalize on it. Bruce is saying it, and I'm going to say the same thing. People are disgusted by what they see at the federal level, right? They can't stand that kind of dysfunction. And there is a big thirst for problem solving. Let's just figure out what the right thing is. And the only other thing I will say, because I think this is important, is we don't have to get it right every time. And I think that's part of the thing for us all to remember, because there are a lot of people in this room and they work on these problems every day. We just have to keep trying to solve them and keep working. And when we get it wrong, we just need to recognize it and work again to do it a little bit better. But we cannot wait for someone else to solve these problems. Solve it, work on it. Every problem is intractable until you solve enough small problems to where the big problem is no longer intractable. And we just got to keep working on it in our community.
What do you think, and I know you're thinking in 3 years, but in a 5-year window, what does that framework look like for Chattanooga? Do you have any thoughts about where we look as a business community, where we look at from an education perspective, how we can manifest new localism here?
Yeah, so we're going to continue to densify. I became mayor 5 years ago. We've doubled the number of people who live in our downtown. that's going to keep happening. It's just going to keep happening. You drive around and look at all the development that we have going on. It's just, and yet, you know, I sit at City Hall and people still come in to see me every day. That's going to continue to happen. We're going to see our market power improve, and hopefully some of these businesses, as they keep growing, are going to expand. And when in our city, when somebody who's a 2-person business becomes a 100-person business, or a 200-person business, or a 300-person business, which we're seeing right now, that creates a lot of wealth and a lot of power. And we don't need Facebook and 17,000 people for us to see a lot of different changes in the community. And then the final thing that I think we got to make sure that we do, and that is to continue to have a real focus on equity. We're making a big play in early learning, and saying that for us to have a great city, we need to concentrate on families in this early part of life. But there are lots of other entities that are working in different areas. And if we keep this idea of, okay, how do we build our city out? How do we make sure that we do it smartly? Focus on the future, continue in equity. Again, we're not going to get everything right. That's okay. We just got to keep pushing forward.
Okay. Now, Bruce, you've been down here a few times now, right? As you take snapshots and you see Chattanooga progressing over the years, the innovation district is something that I'm sure you've seen evolve since your first time down here. What does that look like from a broad perspective, and how can we work on some of the things that Mayor Burke's talking about in order to actually manifest those?
Yeah, first of all, I applaud the mayor, I applaud Ken, and I mean, there's so many people involved in this thing. It really is the Chattanooga way. You know, I mean, you really are intensely collaborative. You must have had good parents, I suppose. I mean, I just assume that's what's going on here. But so I think your best days are ahead of you, because you have made some very special investments here that are quite unique and distinctive that the market hasn't fully valued yet, right? And the mayor's right. There's companies out there. They may not be American companies, frankly. They may be out of Northern Europe, or they may be out of Israel, or they may be somewhere else, who are going to look here and go, okay, so let me get this. You're a high-quality place. You're in between Nashville and Atlanta. You got, high-speed internet, and you have the smartest grid in the United States. This is not that complicated. We need to be there. Right. And you've got UTC within walking distance. And I mean, so there are investors and companies and talented workers out there who are going to see this place as a place where they can basically come, locate, build a company, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or it'll be homegrown. And then as you begin to grow, the challenge is to get your schools and skills system to get people on a feeder, so they can, because not everyone has to be, get a PhD or get a master's to participate in this innovative economy. You need credentials. You need skills. You need the stuff that community colleges provide or that special high schools provide. We can do this, right? The Germans do this. The Danes do this. The Dutch do this. We can do this. So I think your best days are ahead of you. You've basically have a lot of inputs now. Yeah. That ultimately you're going to have outputs and then outcomes. So you may be at 20% of what you can be right now. The biggest challenge facing, and I've said this before, the biggest challenge facing places like Chattanooga, frankly, is complacency. Because you see all this stuff going on, and you say, whew, it's a lot better than the 80s. It's a lot better than the 90s, And then you just say, okay, well, it's looking pretty good. You're at 20%. You're at 20%. So when I heard this, the sort of plans for the South Broad District, go for it, I mean, the build out of the core, the down, go for it. I mean, this could be one of the top 5, 7 places in the United States. I mean, and then when that international company comes in, my Lord, and it's not going to be Amazon basically saying, let's like rip the heart out of your tax system so I can come here, you know? That's not a company you want to play with. I mean, you know, travel the high road, then you win. What do I really think? But, you know.
Well, Mayor Burke, I want to open it up to a few questions in the audience. Yes, sir, or Eleanor? Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think what we're going to do is invent multiple structures and institutions. We focus on Indianapolis. We also focus on Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's a lot less formal than Indianapolis. You know, Pittsburgh is also a place like Chattanooga that plays well together. The philanthropies, the universities, the corporate sector, both the old corporate sector, the new corporate sector, the mayor, the county exec, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Indianapolis is much more formal. There really is a table that people sit around and then decide how to invest substantial amounts of private and civic capital. You know, if you read the last chapter of the book, I spent a lot of time reading the sort of philosophy and writings of Reid Hoffman, who's the founder of LinkedIn, because he has this theory of network intelligence. And his theory is that if you're the head of a company of several hundred people, and the old hierarchical model is you sit at the top, you know, the CEO, the CFO, the COO, the board, and you close decision making. His theory is you really want to open it up to different sort of strata of your company, because that exposes you to different kinds of ideas, different customers, different places. So I think the model we put forward here is a certain kind of model. But what I'm looking for, and it may come out of like Finland, you know, because I've been doing a lot of work in Helsinki recently, where they really are trying to engage broader sets of their citizenry in co-governing and co-problem solving, enabled by technology. So I'm not sure we totally have, from my perspective, we're going to end up with multiple institutional models and multiple network models, some of which may be obvious to us, and some of which won't be that obvious because they're going to come out of different cultures and different societies, and they're really going to be technologically driven to a much greater extent than these old tables perhaps have been driven. So I think we're still in an exploratory phase. So, the challenge for Chattanooga is, okay, that's what Indianapolis did, that's what St. Louis did, that's what Cincinnati did. What's Chattanooga going to do that's going to blow our minds, you know? I mean, and actually have a broader set of your leadership at multiple levels and multiple geographies participate in a very constructive and transformative way. Take on that challenge. I mean, right now I think Helsinki may be the place that's trying that, but go hang out in Helsinki for a while, see what they're doing.
Yes, sir.
Talk about localism would be easy to.
Yeah.
Do you see value in interlocalism? How do you see
that? So a couple thoughts, and I would love to hear what the mayor. So here's one way of thinking about the city-state or the city metropolis. Because we have sprawled for so long in the United States, right? We were the land of sprawl. We're so big, you can do it. Half of the people who live in rural America by certain criteria, density criteria, live within the envelope of metropolitan America. Think about that. We think about this urban-rural rift as if it's like Manhattan and rural Kansas, right? And actually, half of rural America lives in metropolitan areas. So we can solve some or mitigate that rift within our own metropolitan areas because the political parties will just exploit the rift. That's all they will do at the national level and at the state level. It's in their interest to win elections to do that. But at this level, it's in our interest to actually strengthen the interdependency and linkages between cities and rural counties. That's one answer. The second answer, which is about interlocal networking, I think we're going back to the Hanseatic League. I was a history major in university, and obviously you can't really use that for much of anything. But if you study the Hanseatic League, which is the way Northern Europe sort of evolved, right? City-states basically engaging with other city-states, right? So one city was very good at beer, another good was fish, another was good at salt, it all sort of works out in the end. So I think we're going to create networks of cities in the world that trade together, share knowledge together, because cities collaborate and partner. Nation states, we know what nation states do. City-states tend to actually work together. And they tend to, because it's like this great experiment about solutions. So I think the 21st century is going to see sharper urban-rural connections, which could start here, right? And then sharper connections across cities and metropolitan areas within the United States and around the world. And the nation state will still be important. But again, most of them are health insurance companies with an army. So,
So to that point, after reading Metropolitan Revolution and thinking about this, when I came into office, one of the first things I did was start a regional mayor's council. There are actually 36 mayors in our region. And that we decided to include Georgia mayors in our region because we thought, well, let's not worry about state lines. And we meet every 90 days, and I offered to go wherever they want, and they all want to come here because they want to get champions, basically. So, which is important. It's actually, that's part of the thing, and it's been fantastic, and so it's useful. When South Pittsburgh had a big flood a couple years ago, I called the mayor, had a relationship, and said, "What do you need?" And they said, "We need 2 police cars." That isn't that hard for us. We have plenty of police cars. Those relationships that you build actually matter. I think the second part is that if we're really going to change things on a wider level, the market power that exists across cities actually helps to make wider changes that we need. And we're not as organized as we could be. The politics are difficult. But I do think that you're going to continue to see over the course of time. I mean, there are mayors, for example, right now talking about running for president. You probably haven't seen that in 100 years, right? And the reason that they're doing that is because they think stuff isn't happening there. Regardless of that political power, you're going to see cities coming together and trying to accumulate their market power in different ways. And they're not going to care, by the way, if they're in Tennessee or Georgia or North Carolina. They're going to say those boundaries don't matter to us.
totally.
Man.
Great city.
I know. Historically, we've had modified structure. Population of Black people in obviously a power to wider suburbs for fear of regression.
Sure.
So, in the
Yes, I was asked to come to Birmingham a couple of years ago and to talk about city-county consolidation, and frankly, I thought it was like the wrong conversation to have, because it was like a conversation about government power. And you know, when you're in Birmingham, you've got the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and you can basically fall out of the downtown and you're at UAB, and then there's the Southern Research Institute, and it's this incredible powerhouse. And then you have all these low-income neighborhoods that are ringing, you know, this incredibly innovative hub. And I basically said to everyone in Birmingham, I don't know why you're talking about city-county consolidation, just leverage your market power. And then maybe talk about city-county consolidation in 10 years from now, where the fiscal power and the employment power of the city is so great that the suburbs will want to consolidate with you instead of you asking to consolidate with the suburbs. I mean, it just sounds like a crazy conversation to me. I mean, market power, civic power, can trump government power many times. And the key is to try to enhance it and leverage it. So I think Birmingham, like Chattanooga, has just this incredible core, you know, historic core. I mean, this was like Pittsburgh's partner at the turn of, you know, whatever, the middle of the 20th century. It was a steel sort of city, right? So I think sometimes we just get too focused on government, you know, as opposed to public, private, civic, university, and on that, the power of the network. And, you know, to some extent, when I say that, it sounds like, well, you're denigrating government. Actually, the mayor has more power in the network world than in the government world, because the mayor can deploy soft power. He's the only person who has democratic legitimacy to, you know, cajole and shame and, you know, bring everyone together. I mean, who else is going to bring everyone together in a city but the person who the voters have elected to run the city? So I think in some ways the public sector is more important in a network model than in just a purely government model. But look, if people want to try to consolidate, go for it. But I think it just seems to be other things to be doing right now that will have a bigger effect on job creation, fiscal power, and providing, you know, the opportunity for large segments of our citizenry.
So just to rephrase, governmental power doesn't matter, mayoral power
Yeah.
is the only thing that matters. just sum up.
Are you term limited? Get rid of the term limits. You know, that's another idea.
That's an interesting point. Term limits.
I don't believe in term
they
limits,
get
but
tough.
that's a whole other thing.
So one interesting point I wanted to bring up, and I think it's particularly applicable in a place like Chattanooga, which is, you know, throughout your book, problem solving and partisanship, they're not in part of the same discussion, right? That when you look across a place like Chattanooga where you have, you know, people on both sides of the aisle, that this whole issue of solving problems is almost apolitical, right? And that the fact is, that should be the last question you're asking of people, you know, kind of what their politics are. Can you talk a little bit about kind of with the millennial population and their evolving sense of politics and partisanship, how that localism kind of plays out?
Yeah, I mean, look, I want to respect politics for at least a second here, because I mean, because you know, people have ideas. You want to fight for your ideas, but when you go to Washington or you go to your state capitals, you either wear a red jersey or a blue jersey, right? And the way in which our society has evolved, and frankly, many societies have evolved, it just leads to clash and contentiousness. At this level, I presume people have different partisan allegiances and different ideological perspectives. That just brings, in a problem-solving world, more perspective to the table, right? You sort of begin to diminish, you know, well, you have to adhere to a certain ideology for when a bill comes before the legislature, as opposed to, okay, I have more of a market perspective or I have more of a government perspective. Okay, let's see how they combine to actually get stuff done. I mean, the whole focus at the local level is progress, you know? And so I think there's just a natural organic difference between government and network that is playing out in this century. Now, where it all leads, we're not entirely sure, because these higher levels actually are supposed to do certain things, you know. They don't particularly do them most of the time, but they are supposed to do certain things. So we have to get them back on track. But that's why if we have enough problem solving going on from this level, and it bubbles up, and it's affirmative, and it's positive, and it's infectious, and the urban-rural rift begins to be mitigated, and this network of cities and market power the mayor's talking about begins to be constructed, we will take back these higher levels of government. And we will get them to actually do what they're supposed to do. And, but that may be in 5 years or 10 years and 25 years. In the meantime, we better get about solving problems, particularly for our kids. I mean, there's no time to waste. So I don't know. Look, I worked in the federal government for 10 years, and it was great. It was like the last period where there was like bipartisan possibilities. But whew, it's brutal now.
One question in the corner here.
Hey, I'm Michelle Peterson. I'm the one who invited you to dinner. Thanks for.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. I listened to a podcast of yours, and I was really fascinated that you were a fan of a lady mayor in Fort Worth based on her soft skills, and I've not really found myself to be that soft. Things that I do in business. I'd love to hear your comparison to her ability to move Texans, who I do a lot of business with, versus what you've seen from, I guess you're a fan of San Antonio.
Yeah, very much so.
We do a lot of business in San Antonio. I'd love to hear what the lady in Fort Worth said it a little bit on the podcast, but you didn't expand.
Well, actually, it was my friend Jeremy who talked about the mayor of Fort Worth. I would say, you know, both your mayor, the mayor of Louisville, the mayor of Salt Lake County, you know, soft skills is, you know, the great thing about America or any mature economy is we have great specialization, right? It's really the hallmark of a sophisticated economy. We have people who have great expertise about early childhood education, and other people have great expertise about K through 12, and other people who are expert about community colleges. From a kid's perspective, it's just a life cycle, right? You know, what you really want is some integrated system that allows you to move from from cradle to career, so you can basically achieve your your full opportunities. So what Mayor Fisher has done in Louisville is basically put everyone in the room who deals with the life cycle of a child or young adult and say, folks, we're all in the same business here, you know, but you're really good at that, and you're really good at this, and you're really good at that. Okay, let's pull it all together now, right? And let's just put the child first. And let's set metrics and outcomes for each stage of the child's progress, and let's just keep everyone moving and rowing in the same direction. That's cradle to career, that's homelessness, choose your favorite topic. In any sophisticated economy, climate change, it's gonna be fragmented. There's gonna be different parts of the system that has different forms of responsibility. So the soft power of mayors is just to get everyone in the room and basically say, look, we all want the same outcome. Let's just start moving in the same direction here, and let's hold each part of the system accountable. This is not to basically say to anyone you're failing. It's just to say let's have an integrated, holistic approach. That's soft power. In the 21st century, that may be more important than hard power. It may be more important than hard power at this level. And frankly, only the mayor and the county executives, if you all have them, can be the one to do that. So that's what we were trying to get at. And, you know, when you say soft power, it sounds like you're soft, you know? So it sounds like, well, that can't really be achieving anything. On cradle to career, on homelessness, on downtown regeneration, it's like the real game, you know? It's the real game.
No, I think, but the other way to phrase this is soft power is activating your network.
Yeah, totally, absolutely.
And so I think that's the other way to think about it is, government has a big budget in Chattanooga. We try to use that as much as we can, but that's still a fraction. Yeah. That's still a fraction of our city's market power. And so part of what's been special about our community and when we've worked best is when we've been able to activate all parts of that network and get them moving in the same direction. I think that's, we don't always, again, we try to do it on as many places as we can. Unfortunately, we don't get it on every place, but I do think there are moments where you really see progress because everybody in that sphere is pushing in that same direction.
Well, thank you all. Bruce, thank you so much for sharing New Localism with us.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Hey, good, Marcus, man. It's a pleasure to meet you. Absolutely. Thanks for all the free work and stuff.